back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Hopefully, we'll have one more joining us. But Paul, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. We got to figure out the coordination because if there's going to be two Pauls in this talking about Garrison, we'll just have to speak evenly. But Paul, it's a pleasure to have you back. Now, can you maybe give me your breakdown on some of your work when it comes to the Garrison investigation?
Yeah, sure. So it's good to be back with you, Robbie. A couple of years ago, I started doing basically a very massive and somewhat straightforward project of creating a giant index of the surviving Garrison folders. So most of your listeners, or all of your listeners, I'm sure, will know who Jim Garrison was and his significance in terms of the JFK assassination. He was the only person to bring the case to court. So anyway, the project that I carried out was literally just going through the files, folders that basically survived his well and truly past his tenure as District Attorney of New Orleans, sitting in a file cabinet, I gather. And he's always been, Garrison, ever since, has always been a bit of a polarising figure across the JFK assassination research community. Some of the leads or tangents that he turned up were now, with hindsight, of course, it's easy to judge with perspective, but a lot of the leads that he turned up, now seem a little bit silly. He was also taken in by, or he was sabotaged by people that were inflicted as witnesses were inflicted as witnesses to sabotage his investigation. So basically giving dummy accounts to things that just seemed ridiculous or might send him down a real tangent. But yeah, what I wanted to do was really just put out and make it as easy as possible for people to see how much he collected, and not just Garrison the man, but he had a team of assistant district attorneys and investigators that worked solidly for a good a period of, I think, two or 3 years leading up to the trial of Clay Shaw. Anyway, and one of the things that really struck me as I was going through the files was that Garrison never stopped looking into the case. He was really keeping an eye on Harold Weisberg's work. Mark Lane was someone that worked directly with Garrison, apparently, but he never, despite all of his issues that he had in his second, not sure, it was in the 70s anyway, and he had a stupid case brought against him of rigging pinball machines or something like that. Something as a way to really was clearly a beat up to really compromise his legacy and his significance in terms of not just as a DA, but what he was able to turn out in regards to the JFK assassination. And really, I guess what a lot of people would argue is the formation of Lee Harvey Oswald, the presumed, or who would go on to be cast forth as the assassin of President Kennedy in Dallas. So very interesting to wade through all of the documentation that Garrison collected as a result of his during his investigation from the mid '60s through when as part of the Clay Shaw trial.
Now, what is your index identification thing? What's the purpose of it? Like with the names, the listings? I mean, obviously everyone knows about Clay Shaw, David Ferrie, and these other ones, which I'm still wondering how he even came across those. Like, where did his investigation even necessarily start? But also where your work's focused when it comes to listing, at least some of the names that Garrison was after.
Yeah, so what I would do, and it was there are some 13,000 pages. A lot of duplications as well. So impossible for me to read through all of that. I'd still be going now. So what I would do is scan a page. Just I was looking for names. That was the entire purpose of the project, was to scan for names on a document. So it might be a file, it might be a memo that one of Garrison's investigative team. Sent him, to say, look, we've come up with this lead, something to do with an alleged, sighting of Lee Oswald out in Clinton, Louisiana, in the summer of 1963, along those lines. So I was literally just scouring these pages for names, and what I would do is it's just on a giant spreadsheet. I have a column for the name, the name of the folder that it's in, and then I have the page where the name was, and then I start to add in the context that I was able to glean from scanning that document. So it might be related to something that happened in Mexico City, and it was part of the Cuban consulate line of inquiry. So I'm just giving as much context. I gave as much context as I could to each name that I found through on pieces of paper throughout the files and folders of the Garrison filing cabinet, if you like.
Any names that seemed pertinent to the assassination?
Yeah, so a great deal. So just he was really, and I know you've spoken about this recently, but there was a great deal on David Ferrie. Great deal. He was no doubt that was the person that he was really honing in on. Some sightings of Ferrie all around Louisiana. There was an interesting sighting of David Ferrie. This is after the assassination as well, and this is the thing that what I think is most interesting about the Garrison folders is that a lot of the things that Garrison was investigating wasn't just in the lead up to November 22nd, 1963. He kept when a person came to light as an investigation, necessitates you continue to monitor them, and Garrison clearly did. He was someone that was, I think, as a lot of people know, was his movements were. This is David Ferrie. His movements were very suspicious on the afternoon of November 22nd, and at the time, Garrison, just assumed that the FBI had taken care of that lead, but they soon discontinued it and didn't do anything with it. And the story goes that Garrison picked up the case a couple of years later. Anyway, things to do with David Ferrie, sightings, with all manner of characters in and around New Orleans before and after. So we're talking the months leading up to November 22nd. Garrison was even able to, from memory, he was even able to turn out, documents, evidence, in interviews of people in relation to Ferrie, Clay Shaw, going back to the very early '60s. So he really did really dug very deeply, and it's very evident as going through the files as I did. Ferrie, Clay Shaw, they were the ones that Garrison was basing a lot of his most of his case on. And of course, we know that David Ferrie died suddenly in very mysterious circumstances in February of 1967. So it would turn out to be a good couple of years before he brought the case to trial for Clay Shaw in '69. But he would be the one that he focused on the most.
I understand that Garrison's kind of like a controversial figure in the assassination, but what gives me weight to at least some of the work that he was doing was because NBC and other media corporations were assigned to target him based on certain specials and investigative things. I'm pretty sure he gave a couple interviews that were on TV or radio or something where he talked about some of the work that he was doing. And this became a threat to a lot of, I guess, the main established narrative of Lee Harvey Oswald, which is surprising in its own that these media corporations would even consider him a threat if he's just doing a one guy or, whatever, just going and looking for documentation on stuff. So why do you think NBC and all these other organizations would try and pinpoint a targeted attack on Garrison. You think he might have been right in some areas when it came to Clay Shaw and David Ferry?
Yeah, I think if anything, they were worried that he might accidentally stumble on something. There's no, and I'll be the first to admit, going through Garrison's folders now, there's no smoking gun. There's no direct evidence that ties anything that I could see, anything of New Orleans to Dallas, other than the characters of Ferry. Jack Ruby gets the occasional. He's referred to in the files along the way, but there's no there's no direct line that really creates a very clear and black and white picture of exactly who was behind what and where leading up to Dallas and during it. But I think what the networks at the time were concerned about, and obviously we know that a great deal of people within the mainstream media back then were engaged by the CIA. Operation Mockingbird was obviously a very, very substantial project that the CIA was running for quite a few years before Dallas. To really have very strong advocates or agents, if you like, within the media. So that aside, I think they were just worried that with the way he was digging and all the different directions, all the different tangents that he was taking, they surely suspected that he would come across incriminating things sooner or later, and they sought to stop it with what I was saying before, all kinds of tactics. They sullied his name in the media. They sent in saboteurs to rot the investigation from within. Dummy witnesses. Walter Sheridan. He's someone that was engaged directly on behalf of Robert Kennedy to keep an eye on Garrison's investigation and do what he could to halt it, basically.
Well, there's already evidence for that with not even the JFK stuff. So to kind of rule out the idea of this being like just fantasy conspiracy talk, if you look at Larry O'Brien or Lawrence O'Brien during the Watergate hearings, a lot of people suspected the reason why those plumbers broke in was because they were trying to steal files from Larry O'Brien's desk. I think his office was raided, and then there was another office because they accidentally raided the floor above as well too. But there's a lot of evidence to support that obviously people in political power are trying to sabotage certain investigations to save their own reputation. So if you look at Garrison, what's Garrison uncovering? A lot of areas having to do with New Orleans, yes, and Mexico City. Now, Mexico City is clouded for a lot of people because I believe there's intelligence stuff there that is the reason why our information on was Lee Harvey Oswald there or not. I don't know. It's kind of up in the air. A lot of people believe he was. A lot of people say no, it never happened. But then if you look at New Orleans, well, there was a large amount of information pulled out by the HSCA that the Warren Commission completely neglected. And it seemed like Garrison was only another apple in that kind of bucket that was just picking out things out of New Orleans that were completely dismissed for probably good reasons.
Mm. I think that probably the best way to summarise what Garrison did was he collected a whole lot of puzzle pieces, and he had them out on a massive board, and he was bit by bit he was starting to connect them, but he didn't. As I think now with the benefit of almost 60 years since the when he was right in the middle of the investigation. We know that for even back then, he was making some really good tangents, really making some good inroads. But back then, with the amount of work that he was doing, the amount of investigators that he had on his payroll, it was all gainful. There was nothing dodgy about how he was using I guess New Orleans parish resources, ratepayer, taxpayer funds or anything like that. He was just very busy. He was coordinating a very, very good investigation that was going down many different roads. And you can see that in the reporting back that people like Andrew Scambra and who were some other names Lou Ivan, and yeah, Numa Patel. There's so many people. There was this reporting back, to Garrison, very clear memos of little bits and pieces that they were finding, and they were being organised in a fairly sensible way, and that's how these files are still available. Is that they are very broadly categorised. And as I was going through them, I could see that there were duplications and that there were really random documents that would have nothing to do with Clay Shaw, but Clay Shaw's real estate, for example. But it's an interview on with Miguel Cruz, who was one of the Cubans, anti-Castro Cubans, I believe, going around New Orleans at the time that Oswald was there. So there is a little bit of disorganisation. There's a little duplication. So that was one of the things that I wanted to do, was really, I guess, honour how diligent the investigation was being carried out back then, to organise it and make it easy for people to use as a research tool going forward. And if people along the way use it to determine how close Garrison was, on the trail, or the different leads where he wasn't really close. He was clearly, clearly leading down a dead end. All good. His work, no matter what you think about the man, his work needs to be recognised. It needs to be, because he did more than anyone did at that time, and it shouldn't go forgotten.
When it comes to Clay Shaw, I mean, what's his relevance to the assassination? Obviously, I've come across documents where he might have had a connection with Lee Harvey Oswald. Mostly, I think I mentioned this to you off air, but I found a document that was to Allcoin that stated that Oswald had, for a trucking company, listed a reference of Clay Shaw and Jack Ruby. And, that's a little bit like, I don't know. Obviously, that's from one person's statement, or maybe that's some information, but the FBI wrote that down and thought it was relevant, or maybe we'll try and find more documentation on its relevance. For someone who doesn't know much about Clay Shaw besides the name and maybe seeing photos of him, how would you describe, I guess, his importance or relevance that you were able to come across when it came into the assassination?
I think my impression of the amount of documentation that Garrison, the amount of resources and time he clearly put in Clay Shaw, was that very early on in the piece, he clearly worked out that he was a CIA asset. He was obviously the head of the International Trade Mart in New Orleans. He was a very, very well known person around the city, very, very well connected, very affluent. But I'm not sure exactly when it was, but you can see in the files how Garrison uncovers Clay Shaw's links to Permindex, which is, I don't mean to, this is an area I'm not too familiar with, but an offshore bank that's or offshore financial interests that are linked to another CIA-linked bank in Italy. I'm probably not got that right, but the point is, Garrison really, really honed in on Shaw as being clearly a CIA asset, with interest not just in continental America but overseas as well. And the significance of the alias, so Clay Shaw, Clay Bertrand. That was clearly important because Garrison was picking up, or his investigation was picking up, references to this Clay Bertrand, in certain sectors of the community at the time, and I think that's where the David Ferry and a lot of the a lot of those elements he was able to make very strong linkages to. So I think in Garrison's eyes, he saw Clay Shaw as the CIA man that had all these linkages up and down the levels of whatever was going on around Oswald at that time. Because I think it's pretty safe to say that Oswald was, at the very least, being sheep dipped. He was being used to, as a provocateur for both, pro and anti-Castro elements around town. how that linked to Clay Shaw. Um, you know, that's still out there, and I gather people have done a fair, particularly Paul Bleau and Jim D'Eugenio in Destiny Betrayed. There are linkages and assertions of between Shaw and Oswald, but at the very least, Garrison knew that Shaw was CIA, and he had he had been seen with David Ferrie, he'd been seen with Lee Oswald, not just in New Orleans, but out into Clinton, Louisiana at some point. So I think that's what he wanted to do by bringing the case to trial, was at the very least put the CIA on trial. I don't think he was very confident of getting any kind of conviction in March of '69 with Clay Shaw's trial. I think by then it became an exercise of just getting as much out in the in the public as possible, and almost using the prosecution of Clay Shaw to do that, to shake the trees, if you like, and see what would eventuate.
Now, what are your thoughts on the attack on Clay Shaw? Do you think he went a little bit too deep, like most researchers do, where they end up might have going down a couple rabbit holes? I mean, I'm still in that rabbit hole of trying to figure out the fucking unidentified reporter that's in the basement, the Japanese man. I'm still trying to find that one. That's a rabbit hole. There's not even a point in even looking into it, but I'm just searching everywhere on the internet trying to find his name. But like with Mark Lane and many others, when you get so obsessed with a certain area, you start going into things that you might have lost touch with the basis of why you investigated this person in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting because then when I see what you mean when you get to that point of really super focusing on someone. Sometimes the outcome can be an outcome can be predetermined, and then you're looking, basically, your research from that point on becomes about making the outcome that you've formed in your mind, a fit with whatever it is you're looking and compiling. But I think with Garrison, he clearly did get into the and this is where there obviously is a bit of controversy. He delved into Clay Shaw's homosexuality. It's quite well laid out in Joan Mellon's Farewell to Justice. That's kind of like a biography of Garrison, but also his investigation. He really did get into that. The more seamy side of Clay Shaw, and by virtue of that, I think at the time there was a connection seen to David Ferrie, who himself was homosexual. Um, did he get too far? I don't think so. Maybe by contemporary standards back then, and of course, like I was saying before, he wasn't. I don't think he was operating to some predetermined conclusion. Because Clay Shaw's homosexual, I'm going to, absolutely go after him for anything and everything possible to do with the assassination of President Kennedy. I don't think it was like that at all. I think he was just following, very clear breadcrumbs. And amassing as much as he could at the same time.
Well, at that point, we really never had any exposure. That was before Watergate and everything, so we never had an exposure on the intelligence agencies, even before the Church Committee. So if you're really trying to expose that, okay, you're chasing down a pursuit or lead that could lead to the evidence of the CIA or anybody being involved in the assassination, you got one guy who might have some clear connections to the CIA. His financial interest is much like Jack Ruby's mother's dental records. You're wondering why it's in there, but then you realize, wait a minute, if you're trying to prove that he's getting money funded from an offshore account that is also backed by the CIA or some other type of thing, you start going, now I see the importance of it. That was his only. I mean, how much evidence do we have besides other people going, oh, I knew a CIA agent, or I had a brother whose sister, whose uncle worked as a CIA. I seemed like everybody back then was like a CIA informant or some shit. But if you have Clay Shaw and you have evidence of this guy is connected with the CIA, not only that, but there's this going on, this going on, and this going on. It's not only affecting the way our agencies run, but it's also affecting the American people, whether it's going to be in a specific area like New Orleans and all this. Your investigation has now turned from President Kennedy to exposing the CIA corruption. And this is all before Watergate and the Church Committee. So now you see the importance of it, where I start wondering, do you believe he was sabotaged at any point, fed wrong information, and obviously even with his witnesses? You hear claims about him drugging his witnesses. Well, I've heard claims on the opposite end where it says that some of the people that were involved in the agencies had intimidated witnesses, and I believe that there's even articles posted about that as well, too.
Mm. Mm. Um, so he did use sodium pentothal on Perry Russo, I believe.
Truth serum.
Yeah, yeah, and that's written in one of the documents. Remember that distinctly because that was the point I was always interested in. Well, did he or didn't he? Yeah, yes, he did. So how controversial that was at the time, and even more so, now, with techniques that have obviously technology and ethics and things like that have evolved somewhat since then. We don't really take much credence in lie detector tests either now, because they can be, they're just open to so many different factors, variables, and interpretation to a degree as well. So I think he was using what he could at the time, and people might have fallen into the trap of judging by current standards, something that was being practiced and done back in the day, whether you agree with it, in the now or not. So I think that comes into a little bit with Garrison. Um, one of the things, we talk about sabotage. There was a famous case of a man from Chicago who, I don't know what he can't remember what he promised to tell Garrison, but when he got up on the stand in the Clayshaw trial, he came out in his testimony that he fingerprinted his daughter, or made his daughter give fingerprints whenever she was coming to and from college because he was paranoid that she was an imposter, or that she was being impersonated. So the guy was just laughed completely off the witness stand. So the sabotage was it was right the way through, and it was also with his own team. There was the chap Pershing Gervais, who was contracted by Garrison, I believe, to be an investigator, and it turned out that he was there to do damage to Garrison in the investigation as well. And this Gervais was pretty pivotal in the case being brought against Garrison about the pinball rigging in the 70s. So he was someone that, at the very least, had some kind of grudge before, during, and after the Clayshaw investigation and trial, and kept on with it to the pinball episode, or he was something much worse.
Imagine if he was rigging the pinball machines at that deaf and dumb blind kid that could play a mean game
yeah,
of pinball. I don't know if you've
yeah.
ever. Yeah, okay.
Someone should write a song about
Yeah.
that.
I was hoping you'd get
Yeah,
that reference.
yeah, nice. Yeah.
That is a small charge, though, when you really start examining all of what Garrison was involved in. I mean, you obviously look out throughout the case how many people's names were smeared. And I'm not saying that some of those claims were wrong in any sense of the word, but if you look at the grand total of what they were uncovering or what they were on top of, like Roger Craig gets smeared all over the board on certain statements like that. But obviously, he's kept his testimony relatively the same all the way through all the years he was speaking about it. And just because he had a difference of opinion, people either denied that he wasn't where he was or things of that sort. And the historical record starts to get a little bit fuzzy. That's why I never thought Garrison was super important to learn about conspiracy and the assassination. But if you want to learn, obviously, more, New Orleans, other areas, you start seeing that, okay, this guy was doing a lot of work where anyone who would have been following the case at the time would have found this extremely interesting. And I was surprised. I mean, did you ever see any of his works get published anywhere? Obviously, people had to cover his trial, but more in a positive light, where it's like Garrison's probe uncovers this. I saw Weisberg had a couple things saved up about it.
Yeah, it's funny because Garrison didn't. In the folders that I went through, he didn't collect contemporary articles at the time. I don't think he was. He clearly had more important things to worry about. But Yeah, that's where I think there's a lot of value in the folders, and hopefully what I've done with bringing some order to them is that the amount of things that he digs into. In the 70s, he follows the Watergate side of things. He even gets he was clearly keeping an eye earlier on that on things like the assassinations of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Like he wasn't just focused on JFK, Lee Harvey Oswald, Clay Shaw, David Ferry, New Orleans, summer of 1963. So much more to the folders than that. So there's he gets into the Bilderberg group and Yale Skull and Bones, and he really he that's where he collected a lot of articles, a lot of clippings. Because I think what he was doing when by the time the 80s came around, he was thinking of writing a book, and I think he did. It was the
On the Trail of Assassins.
Speng- that was the mid to late 80s. The Star Spangled Banner, I think it was called, something with that kind of reference in it. Heritage of Stone as well. So that there's a lot of unpublished manuscripts and early drafts of his writings as well, and he's right up until the end, his thinking and his awareness of world issues. And clearly, I think you can almost, and maybe this was because I was swimming in the stuff for a long time, you can see why he would have found interest in that particular reference to the Bilderberg group or something like that. He was always looking, paying attention to threads, and maybe that's where some of the criticism of him comes into it. He just had the probably too big a dragnet.
Well, a lot of
I
us
know.
researchers that get lost in the same thing, we have other areas that have been covered. It's not just like we're exposing it for the first time. But if you think of Garrison as the person that kind of laid the pavement down on the road for a lot of people to start walking on, I mean, he's uncovering all these things. Next, I mean, how many times are you researching something you see? Wait a minute, what's this? And you get stuck down one of those rabbit holes. You end up looking into a reporter's story and finding out later that he invested a property that had associations with a CIA agent or something like that. Well, Garrison's uncovering, holy crap, there's this. And then I found a link to a Bobby Kennedy assassination. And then you're going down that road. And then like a year later, you're like, wait a minute, I forgot I was researching this.
Yeah, he did quite a bit. Garrison, though, he was quite focused. You could tell when he went to Dallas and interviewed a lot of witnesses, not just to the assassination, but some of the things to do with Ruby and the alleged sightings of Ruby and Oswald together at the Carousel Club, and where JD Tippett may have come into things. Um, and clearly he was doing that to try and almost work back to draw any kind of lines back to New Orleans. And probably one of the people, and when we're joined by Paul, he'll be able to talk more to this, is Sergio Akacha Smith. He was someone that was very prevalent around New Orleans, I think until the early or middle part of 1963. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Robbie.
I said it's going to be
How are
hard to
you?
coordinate between two Pauls, but I'll try my best. I'm not going to say Paul number one and two. I might just call you by your last names.
No problem.
He was just mentioning Sergio Arcacha Smith. He said that you might be able to speak probably a little bit better about his relevance or important, maybe some background information. We had been talking about Garrison, some of the targeting, obviously, of his investigation, but I was mentioning the fact that he was a person who kind of paved the road when it came to a lot of the JFK research. So a lot of the stuff where you start wondering, why is he all over the place? And a lot of the criticisms that can be against him, it's like, well, if you're uncovering stuff a lot of the time before the Church Committee in Watergate, before the CIA ever had this exposure, you have Clay Shaw as the person that obviously seems to be the main connection source. You're investigating him. You're not only uncovering stuff maybe related to the assassination, but you're uncovering stuff on a grander scheme of just CIA corruption or intelligence activities corruptions. And if that is only your prior evidence that at the time, the American people really knew about, that's going to be your thing. We all do it. We all get stuck into rabbit holes. We end up diving down something. Next thing you know, he's looking into RFK or something like that. So that's kind of what our conversation's been about so far. But if you want to mention some stuff about Sergio Arcacha Smith, might be helpful.
Well, yes, he's an interesting character. He he was leading the CRC, okay, the Cuban Revolutionary Council. He was a pretty high up during the Batista regime. So he's one of these Cuban exiles that ends up in Miami. It's funny because I think it was in Tampa, he headed riot, a riot to attack the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and backers of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee that were operating out of Tampa. I think it was called the Marty Park Incident. And really interestingly enough, one of the people that sees Oswald hobnob or at least interact with Sergio Arcacha Smith is none other than Carlos Quiroga. Carlos Quiroga is a guy I mentioned to you in the last show, Robbie, who brought a stack of flyers for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee to Oswald's apartment. Now, he was claiming he was trying to infiltrate and find out more, but the fact that it was a stack of flyers got Wesley Lieberler's attention during the Warren Commission. You could even see him repeat the word stack. Okay, the landlady saw that. So, this isn't got one guy with just one flyer that he's filled out, say, hey, I'd like to join. It's more like I'm bringing you your literature so you can be a pain in the neck on Canal Street or whatever. Arcacha Smith eventually got the boot from the CRC. He wasn't trusted by the others, and he was suspected of taking a lot of the money because the CRC had an awful lot to do with the overall distribution of resources coming in from the CIA to Cuban groups. Okay, so it was more of an umbrella group, the CRC, for all the anti-Castro activists. So the fact that Quiroga saw him and people saw Quiroga with Oswald and Sergio Arcacha Smith, you're talking about two people at the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Sergio Arcacha Smith, who attends a riot and is part of a riot to destroy pro-Castro Cubans in Tampa, and yet in close proximity with the number one communist of New Orleans, supposedly. So that goes back to Robbie, the Camp Street address, because if you look at the CRC, recall that they are the members or the people who are occupying the premises of 544 Camp Street, the address that Oswald put on his flyer. So what the heck is going on here? It's absolutely insane. Not only do you have adjacent, to those facilities, the Guy Bannister facility, which is filled with right-wing communists and David Ferry and you name it. David Ferry, by the way, just when he got in trouble for his sex activities when he was with Eastern Airlines, someone spoke on his behalf to help, get him off the hook with the courts. And that was Sergio Arcacha Smith. Okay. So, really interesting character. When Garrison, I think it's Garrison, tried to interview him, for his trial, the condition was that he couldn't ask certain questions, that it was really, really controlled. So Sergio Arcacha. And the final thing that I'm trying to recall here, seems to me, Paul, can correct me on this if I'm wrong? Didn't he have maps or maps of the sewer systems or the around Daly Plaza? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, it does, because he moved to Dallas, didn't he? And that's what I was saying. I'm not sure when in 1963 he moved from New Orleans to Dallas, but that does ring a bell. And the maps that he had. Yeah.
Yeah, that they found that, So, I mean, this is an extremely suspicious character. Uh, how closely he was involved with the assassination is difficult because he's one of the people that they didn't, when Garrison was seeing all his subpoenas refused. He's one of the people intelligence did not want him to talk to.
Now, is his subpoena power, that's obviously a threat because we've never really had a researcher that's been able to actually bring up possible suspects and put them in court and have them on trial, try and testify, or, at least give some evidence of some of the weight that he had in some of his arguments. But that's subpoena power from a district attorney. I mean, obviously that's plays a relevance importance to Garrison's case as a whole. But what witnesses or what suspects? Because obviously there's a conflicting accounts of certain suspects that gave interviews that Garrison took, and then he would have them in court say one thing. But the intimidation factor, I don't know if it was on both sides. If obviously me and Mr. Abbott just mentioned talking about the drugging of things, the claims that came later. Whether it's true or not, it's not my concern. The issue is what witnesses and suspects besides Clay Shaw, David Ferry, and some of maybe outer line characters do we have that gave proper evidence to support a lot of Garrison's claims?
Well, okay, so there's two things. It's the witnesses he couldn't talk to because subpoenas were refused, right? And I'm going to go on memory here, but one I think was Braden, was in California, and Ronald Reagan, I think, refused that subpoena. Another one was Gordon Neville. Gordon Neville he was a CIA asset who, he's the type of guy who could set up bugs in an office and phone systems, and he had an awful lot of experience there. And he was one of the people hired to obstruct. He made it onto Garrison's not inner, but his investigation team, because Garrison was accepting all sorts of volunteers, and there's an awful lot of infiltration there into his group. And the Garrison group that was formed by the CIA, they said, we got to infiltrate this office. We got to know what's going on. So Neville was one of the guys, who was making sure that all of Garrison's strategies were making it, to their way to Shaw's lawyers, right? So someone they tried to interview. I mentioned Sergio Arcacha Smith, Alan Dulles was someone, and then there's another one. I think her name is Moffat. Wasn't she the girlfriend, or she was supposedly at the party where that key witness. What's the name of the key witness, Paul, who was intimidated, who ended up driving a taxi cab? Oh, you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, he's someone who claims to have overheard during a party David Ferry saying that you got to take out Kennedy, and he was one of Paul.
Perry Russo.
Yeah, Perry Russo. So she was linked to Perry Russo somehow, and she could have corroborated what he heard during that party. Okay, which included Cuban exiles and David Ferry and Clay Shaw. So these are the people he couldn't talk to. Now, among the witnesses that he did speak to, well, he talked to, he talked to people who saw interaction between Shaw and Oswald, including prisoner who, look, the guy had drug problems. He was in jail, but he saw Shaw handing over Fair Play for Cuba flyers, or flyers anyway, to Oswald. And of course, I mentioned the Lincoln witnesses. These are people that are the ones who observed Oswald, Ferry, and Shaw at a voter drive north of New Orleans. And maybe I'll repeat the story for your listeners, Robbie. But what happened is, and this is a story in itself. They were trying, I mean, Oswald and his handlers, to get him a job in a mental hospital near Lincoln. And he went and he applied. And there are witnesses that say he applied. And he has the name in his notebook of a doctor who worked at that hospital, okay, in Oswald's notebook. And that, by the way, is thanks to the Garrison files and Garrison's work that we know all this stuff. But he couldn't get a job there. And he was told he ended up meeting some city officials and they said, well, look, if you want a job there, it would help if you were a registered voter in our area. So that's where somehow he gets into a lineup during a voter drive of, Black citizens of that area. So he stood out like a sore thumb. You can imagine that, especially in that era, 1963, in the Deep South. It just didn't fit. And waiting not far away in this big Cadillac or Lincoln Continental is David Ferry and most likely Clay Shaw. I mean, some people describe Clay Shaw. Wasn't there a detective who took the license plate and found that the limousine was registered to the international trademark? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, John Manchester. Well, he was the sheriff. I'm not sure if it was him that did that, but yeah. Well, Francis Fruge.
Well, I've seen a couple accounts doing some of the stuff for clips for witnesses, but I've seen people make statements that some type of wagon or something, and the colors kind of have ranged. So I don't know if this is Moret's wagon, but it was around New Orleans time that Oswald was being seen getting into, or someone identified as this was Oswald getting into one, and they said that license plate was either registered to like Jack Ruby or something.
Oh, that's something else. It's oh gosh. Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that story, Robbie. But this is quite particularly a vehicle that is linked to Clay Shaw. They're big. We're talking about a Cadillac style. I'm pretty sure it's a Cadillac, and it corresponds to the type of vehicle that Clay Shaw was seen in and known to have. So, but the point is what Garrison was doing at this point was trying to prove interaction with Shaw. And he had to go that route because David Ferry died mysteriously. The David Ferry Oswald leagues are a matter of record. Okay, it's not, it didn't even require, witnesses of that nature because they were together in the Civil Air Patrol. And the instructor, and they have pictures of that effect, witnesses as to that effect. So there's an awful lot more interaction between David Ferry and Oswald before the assassination than with Shaw. Shaw, he's kind of a big shot, but he's close to David Ferry. But the number of times he would even want to be seen with Oswald, he's trying to keep his distances because keep in mind, there are two major denials that were made during the Shaw. I mean, there are more than two major ones. One is that he had no links with the CIA or intelligence. And that has been proven false beyond a shadow of a doubt. I think it's Joan Mellon who got the confirmation saying that, no, he was a well-paid CIA asset, and that was through access to information. So that falsity, or that lie, has been corrected forever. Okay, and he had something called what is it called? Q-Enchant clearance. He had special clearance. Now you can argue that a guy who works in the International Trade Center, who does a lot of trips like that, like he does, would be a good source for the CIA. You could, you could argue that so they had their sources, but this guy went a lot further there. I mean, if you look at his World War II background, if you look at his position on Permindex, which is a very suspicious organization, you have all the links to intelligence and it comes out and he says, well paid is the thing. It wasn't just an asset, a well paid asset is what was said. So you see, that had an awful lot. Now, the kicker, I mean, this is something that's incredible. And I have this document. It's in the Garrison files. When Clay Shaw's arrested, right? There's a guy filling out a form, a police, Habergas is his name. And he's filling out a form. It's a standard form. Okay. And you ask, what's your name? What's this? What's that? Question 10. You ask him, do you have any aliases? And I think, Paul, you're familiar with what he answered. It says, Clay Bertrand. Clay Bertrand. He answers that. Okay. So Clay Bertrand, this would have opened the case wide open because Clay Bertrand is the name he used to pay Dean Andrews for, some of the services he would render to gay Latinos and Oswald. He was paying. Dean Andrews represented Oswald a number of times before the assassination, okay, because Oswald got into trouble. He also wanted to have his name cleared because of his, what's the term? Yes, exactly. Thank you, guys. It's great to have great guests and knowledgeable hosts because, I at this hour in the morning, I'm going to forget a few things, but put it this way. So he hires Dean Andrews to pay, but he uses a pseudonym, Clay Bertrand. And Garrison questions Dean Andrews, who's this Clay Bertrand guy? Okay, and Dean Andrews just doesn't want to say it. He says, he knows he's in trouble if he starts spilling the beans on who Clay Bertrand is. He's scared out of his wits. So Clay Bertrand, there's no doubt that he's Clay Shaw. You can get it through the witnesses, but you get it through this bloody questionnaire that was filled out by Habergas. But that piece of proof that Clay Shaw brought during the trial was refused by Judge Haggerty. He says you can't use it because he didn't have a lawyer present when he was answering. So that Now, the thing is he would have done a hell of a job if he were, and I think he did a heck of a job to show the Clay Shaw links. Did he go far enough to say, well, that means that he was behind the assassination? Or, that's a whole other, level of proof there. So, I hope that answers your question, Robbie, on what type of witnesses and what he was getting in on. But, that's how far he could go. But there's a limit because he couldn't go as far as Gaetan Fonzi did. Gaetan Fonzi went even further. He brought this to Miami and who some of the players at JM Wave were. And so you can see that the layers of the onion, when you get, it was easy to show relations with the Cuban exiles because the coordinators of the coup, they want to keep distance between them and the patsy. They obviously, that's the whole idea of compartmentalization and deniability, is to say, the shooter's here, we're here, and between us, what is there going to be? There's going to be, well, he's going to be either a lone nut or he's going to be in cahoots with Castro agents. Oh, well, if it's not Castro agents, well, you have Cuban exiles. But if it's not Cuban exiles, you have the mafia. So there's so many layers between Oswald and people like David Atlee Phillips. But people haven't, they've gone through the layers. So anyway, that's making it's a long-winded answer to your question. Is I think he made a heck of a lot of headway in showing the Shaw link. Sorry, I'm bringing all this up, Paul. Maybe you saw things in there that I'm not bringing up, or
yeah. Well, I mean, what I was saying before is that to me, reading through as much as I did the Garrison files, it's very clear that he assembled so many puzzle pieces, and he was starting to picture them, to be able to place them, connect them together on a giant board. And I think that gave the impetus for more people to, like you say, uncover more layers. Goten Fonzie and church community, HSCA, right the way through. I think, but that's what ultimately the biggest threat that Garrison posed was that he would sooner or later he would start connecting, making solid connections, and bringing out names of your Akacha Smiths and Miguel Cruz, all these people that just were not to be braiding, were just not no-go areas. And if he was allowed to keep going, if Ferry was allowed to was able to stand trial, it would have been a completely different story, I think.
Yeah, and let's not underestimate Eliado del Valle, who was the same bloody day as David Ferry.
Same day, yeah.
Because he was according to Ferry or others, the paymaster. He was someone who flew, I think, with David Ferry, but he certainly coordinated with David flights over Cuba to, commit terrorist acts and sabotage. So this guy here, and he, one article I wrote that goes far back enough, but it was called the Cuban and intelligence, or CIA mechanism. That's what Fabian Escalante called the Cuban exiles. In other words, both the mafia and the CIA would use Cuban exiles to do a lot of dirty work, whether it was Operation Mongoose, whether it was sabotage, you name it. Okay, and they were committing horrific acts of terrorism in Cuba, and not just Cuba, guys. People, organizations, and countries that didn't clamp down on Cuba. Let me name you one: Canada. Because, Canada has always had open tourism with Cuba. So there was a while back, way back in the 70s, I think, a letter bomb that went off in a travel agency. And that was linked to some of the worst terrorists of, terrorists that are linked to this whole gang. When they're talking about Posada, Orlando Bosch, the Samples, that gang, okay? They took down an airline. They took down a Cuban airline that killed like 80, or it got so bad. They were behind most likely the Letelier murder. So, this is, as Paul was saying, this is what, this is what was being uncovered, because the second you get into Cuban exiles, I have a list of all the Cuban exile groups, about 70 or 80 of them. Some are real small, some are big, like Alpha 66, the DRE. Okay, these are really active organizations that were involved in, also, well, they're organized out of JM Wave. That's where they're getting their marching orders, and that's where they're getting their funding, and that's where they're getting their training, and that's where they're getting their weapons. Okay, so when you start uncovering what are the things that Garrison found, is that Bannister's office was an actual place where you would find a ton of weapons that were being stolen and being gun running, that would go through his office to end up in Miami. Okay? And so all this was coming to head. And but the thing is, when they got the press after him, when they infiltrated his office, when they refused subpoenas, when they, then they started getting him into legal trouble, because the whole story was, hey, Garrison's misusing public funds. So now, the whole idea was to bog this guy down. They'd even send in people like Frank Sturgis and Jerry Patrick Hemmings, two notorious false flag artists that would talk and talk and talk to him to get him running in the wrong direction. The Torbett document, right? The Torbett document, it was a document so complicated. And they had him reading the whole Torbett document, trying to make sense out of this thing that gave little hints of truth, but the whole idea is how can we get these guys chasing their tails? And so I mean, that's where he would have gone. And despite what they did to him, what happens with the HSCA? They come along and they look at Garrison's work, and a guy like Tannenbaum says, you know what? I kind of found that guy Garrison was, a little bit of a loose cannon. I'm paraphrasing here, but the more we looked into what he said, the more he was right. And Garrison ended up giving information to the HSCA and helping them. And then he kept researching after the assassination. He wrote his incredible book that became the source of JFK. And it was such a good source and such a good movie that that's what created the JFK Act. So, I mean, you look at Garrison's contribution and you push it up to the fact that there's an act that is responsible for declassification. It's a hell of a story.
When it comes to Garrison's reflections, I guess back then, or what he was able to do and the smearing of him by media, do you think it would have been different if he was smeared by media today and he was doing his investigation in today's times with the public doubt of the media? Because obviously, I think if you're a researcher looking back, like for me, looking back at Garrison's investigation, I'm coming across way too many media articles saying we need to, quoting one of the NBC documents, but take him down. Was a term that was used in a document referring to Garrison's investigation. If I would have saw that pop up, or if I would have even seen a media article saying Garrison's DA probes investigation into Clay Shaw, I would immediately go, okay, this guy's obviously on to something. And I think with hindsight now, a lot of people of my generation looking back at these documents will notice the same thing, that there was obviously this coordinated attack on Garrison, which means why is that happening? You're not doing that if the guy's crazy. A lot of media won't even give them the attention. If they're crazy, they'll ignore them. But you see countless articles, some of them that I've seen published that support some of Garrison's findings, mostly stuff that's like Midlothian mirror type stuff, or something that would be like an article that was already done by a researcher who was already investigating, who maybe had a connection with the press or something like that, that said something good about Garrison. So media, all of it wasn't complicit. It was just the main organizations did a targeted attack. Now, that could be Mockingbird. I'm sure a lot of people that are aware of that already. But when we talk about Garrison's investigation and his practices being done then compared to what would happen if it was done now, it is a hypothetical. But obviously, it would change the tides. I think what he was able to expose, if you've researched the JFK assassination, that there was a large amount of areas that should have been researched or investigated by the Warren Commission. And it wasn't for a particular reason. And it seems like through Garrison's investigation, it was because a lot of those things happened to involve intelligence connections and stuff that was going on that we can't talk about. I had talked a while back with a guy who studied intelligence activities, mostly in relation to the Cold War. Had nothing to do with the JFK assassination. But he goes, if you want to know something really cool, he goes, it's kind of a hypothetical, but if you ever look at what the movies were promoting back then when it came to propaganda, any area that they promoted a movie about that was very propagandized is usually where the intelligence agencies were heavily involved in. And he rattled off a couple examples. Then I thought back, what about Mexico City? And some of the older movies around the James Bond spy stuff, a lot of stuff really targeted kind of Mexico, which was weird. Like why we never thought of them as being like a threat, I guess, to the United States in today's time. But what do we find out? Well, Oswald's involved in Mexico City, and that's the one giant if that's out there in the whole case. It could be a large amount of investigative. I mean, the ARB was very focused into Mexico City, and I think they exposed a lot of intelligence stuff over there. So I think the focus with Garrison with exposing things of New Orleans and Mexico City is important. I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts would be on an aspect of the media reception today and what that log or what he did back then playing an impact for the minds of today's thinking when it comes to doubt in their government.
Yeah, well, I think
Long-winded
Well,
question, but I brought that shit around.
that's a good one. Yeah. Well, I think the way he was treated at the time tells you everything. You know, the slander in the news and the infiltrators into his investigation. They had to keep an eye on him, but they also had to. The only way they could, I think, properly, kill what he was doing was by 1,000 paper cuts. Because if they'd, and I think, they say in JFK the film, Donald Sutherland to Kevin Costner, they would have killed you already, but there's too much light on you. I think that there's a lot of credence in that. If there was something that if something happened at the Garrison right at the height of his investigations in 66, 67, 68, that would have just been an open door. That would have made what he was doing. It would have taken new proportions. So I think what we see now in today's media is kind of that, a little bit more of that template, that blueprint. It's the slandering. It's taking advantage of polarization of politics. Marginalization. It's assassination by keyboard. It's we're well and truly past those times where to physically eliminate someone. It's probably more easier and prudent to do it. To assassinate their character, and I think that was what they did to Garrison very clearly.
Well, I think
for a long time after.
I think there's a few major differences today, Robbie. First of all, if you go back to 63, they were still, just after the Eisenhower period. It was after World War II, and they were still riding a high and believing everything the government said. So trust in media and trust in the government in 63, it was a turning point, a beginning. So so when the government said something, you believed it. And there are studies that show this, by the way. There are studies that shows that confidence in the media started just, going in a downward spiral after the JFK. People did not believe the Warren Commission. Then what do you get later? You get other political assassinations. You get Vietnam. You get Watergate. You get, it goes to Iran-Contra, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and all that. So today, when the government says something, instead of believing it, you're doubting it all the time. That's one big difference. So people are less trusting today. Second thing is social media. If you go back to 63, the foreign press showed a lot of doubt compared to American press. Well, today we have access to, Rogan and we have access to the BBC and we have access to anything. We don't have to have it delivered at our doors. So people are getting, information, and then that information they're getting is going viral for quickly. So, for me to be able to send Paul and that we're being on a Zoom call today, this is unthinkable in 63, right? So you couldn't have these discussions that would reach thousands of people later on. So they would have been, today, I think, I'm not saying that mainstream media doesn't line up and toe the line, but they're not carrying all the cards that they used to. And I think that's bringing, people that organize media. Their big question is, how do we organize social media? How do we organize digital media? And so those are huge differences between back then and today. The fact that something gets declassified, suppose something got declassified in 63. You don't have a Mary Farrell Foundation that, says, hey, whoever wants to see this document, or the document finally gets loose and everybody's talking about it on the education forum or on your show, Robbie. So those are the challenges you would have, today to cover something like that up. I mean,
You had mentioned a couple people that Garrison wanted to call in as witnesses that weren't allowed, that were denied, or just not put up on the stand. But when we talk about Ferry's death, do you think that was in relation to the whole Garrison investigation? That obviously, if he was called up, he might have testified. Because couldn't have they just denied him testifying? But do you believe that Garrison just would have kept picking and picking until he might have said something to Garrison that Garrison could have just been able to publish without the court needing to have him in there and put it on a national record?
oh no, that would have made the news because he would have said, "I am indicting this person," like with Shaw. Okay, so if it wasn't Shaw, it would have been Ferry. I think his first target was Ferry. Because of the obviousness of the relations there. And Ferry was an easier target. He wasn't an upstanding citizen of New Orleans either. He was someone who was involved in scandalous behavior, and so. But I'm not saying that Ferry wouldn't have been. So Ferry is the type of guy who really could, and Del Valle again. I don't want to forget him. Could not be given permission to talk. I mean, if you believe the Garrison and the JFK movie, is that when Ferry finds out that there's interest in him, he goes berserk, and he thinks he's going to be targeted. I mean, I don't know what verbatim. He says, "I'm a dead man. I'm a dead man." He's apparently saying that to Lou Ivan. I don't want to go on the record as saying that happened as is, because I don't have enough corroborating evidence there, or it's just not top of mind for me what Ivan said about that. But the point is he was extremely agitated, and according to Garrison, showed remorse. Garrison said David Ferry was one of the only people who showed remorse. So, I think that case would have been much stronger than Shaw. I don't know that Shaw or David Ferry, that what they were doing that summer for sure was with the view of setting up Oswald, particularly. It's on a need to know basis. Suppose what they're thinking is, there's a communist problem in New Orleans. They're trying to infiltrate Cuban groups. We need someone who can go down there and flush out communists by pretending they're with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And we think in Oswald, we got a good candidate because he went to Russia, he'll come across as a Marxist, whatever. So, the group around Oswald, did Guy Bannister, did David Ferry, did others know that he was being lined up as a patsy for Dallas? I haven't made up my mind on that. Apparently, the Cuban exiles did see him as a snitch, though. They saw him as a snitch because his mission wasn't only, according to what I've been reading, to tell his handlers about the communist situation. It was also to help monitor what was going on with the anti-Castro Cubans, because by then, Robbie, the Kennedys clamped down on mongoose. They were closing the camps. They were seizing the weapons. They were trying to stop all hostility towards Castro because of the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was too dangerous. They made promises to the Russians. They said, "We will not invade." And so these terrorist activities that are going on, that are sponsored to a certain degree by the CIA and being paid for, all of a sudden you have to stop it cold. And how do you do that without pissing off all the Cuban exiles in the US? Kennedy was between such a rock and a hard place by then. So a lot of people think that that Oswald was snitching on both the anti-Castro Cubans and the pro-Castro Cubans. Okay, so if the Cuban if the Cuban exiles saw that, you can be damn sure that this guy Oswald wasn't worth much in their books.
I think his time in the New Orleans jail after the fight with Bringuier, I think that's very telling. He spoke with an FBI agent for 90 minutes. I mean, what an opportunity to give an update on the pro and anti-Castro work that he was doing. I think that's a real stamp, a real highlighter there.
Yeah, and you're right, Paul. That's so important, right? So Oswald gets into this fight with the guy who's heading the DRE in New Orleans, Carlos Bringuier, and seems and fight, as you say, because the arresting officer says that they look staged. And then while in jail, and I always bring this up, first of all, why would the FBI even be interested in meeting a guy who just got into a little street fight? The FBI. I mean, that's like rolling out the Russian army to squash an ant, right? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Then they'd spend an hour and a half to 3 hours, by the way. An hour and a half is the minimum. I think that's according to Martello, the New Orleans guy who. And the first thing, according to Joan Mellon, is John Quigley is the guy who showed up. Quigley was an assistant to Warren DeVries. Warren DeVries is the guy that Oswald apparently wanted to talk to. DeVries is the guy, the guy you go to in the FBI in New Orleans for all the anti-communist, the Fair Play for Cuba committee activities. That's his job. Okay, so Oswald, who, keep in mind, there was a dirty little secret about Oswald when the Warren Commission started, and then it came out within 4 or 5 weeks, is that the DA, I think, who was it, of Dallas, a guy, I think his name is Carr. Anyway, he says, you know what? We have information that Oswald's an informant. He's a paid informant, and his FBI number is this one. Okay, and he gives it. That went away. That had to go away, but Gerald Ford wrote about it in his book, and he even said the number, and he says, but he was an informant, most likely. I mean, so that's why he was doing his job as an informant, as Paul brings up, when he met Quigley for an hour and a half. What do you think he was talking about? He says, well, he punched first, and then I did this because he did that. What the heck, try and imagine a 1.5 hour discussion, and that the FBI officer is staying there and listening. You'd think he'd have more important things to do, unless it was to, get the scoop on what was going on.
You want to add anything, Paul?
Yeah, I would just say that I agree with Paul. I think New Orleans, Lee Harvey Oswald was a formation after the fact of him as the assassin in Dallas. I think he was serving. He had his finger in many pies in New Orleans, pro and anti-Castro elements and things. And there was a period though where he went off the grid or was taken off the grid. No one knew where he was in very early September, I think it was, and for a couple of weeks. And I just wonder if that has something to do with his repositioning or reutilization as for what would ultimately happen in Dallas.
That's a weird period. Yeah, the period where Marina goes up to New Orleans, right, with Ruth Payne, and in her initial testimony and answering to FBI agents, Marina's categorical. She did not know that Oswald went supposedly to Mexico. It's only later on, after, the way later in the game, when she was talking to the Warren Commission, that she built up this story that he had gone to Mexico City. But up to then, it was no. So what was going on there is, is very strange, because, even the whole Mexico City thing, it is so obvious, right, that he was impersonated, because I think it's up to about 8 people that heard the tapes of Oswald on the phone, supposedly with the Russians, and 8 people saying, well, first of all, keep in mind, here's the story, right, is Oswald supposedly goes to Mexico City, and he's acting suspiciously, or said to be acting suspiciously, with Cuban agents accepting bribes. We know that was made up. There's a guy who was an asset for David Atlee Phillips that made up this story because he claimed to have seen Oswald accepting bribes. The only problem is Oswald wasn't.
Wait, you mean Avardo? His name was Arvardo?
Oh yeah, this is. He was the old time curveball. Okay.
He said he saw Oswald hand like 5,000, or someone hand Oswald
$8,000, and talking about killing, and I'll do it, you won't do it. I mean, it's so ridiculous, and it's as if the guy count 8,000. Like he counted the money in front of. I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous pieces of testimony. But this guy was a David Atlee Phillips asset, and David Atlee Phillips had asked Veciana. Okay, Veciana, I mean, there's a whole story around Veciana, but he had asked him, could you contact your uncle here in Mexico City and have him make up stories too? Okay, so he did that with June Cobb. June Cobb is another CIA asset, where she made the claim that she saw Oswald at a twist party with communist activists. I mean, look, it was so ridiculous. And Dan Hardaway and Lopez said, all these false flags, they're all your people, Mr. Phillips. Can you explain that? He says, well, I know they're my people, but I can't explain it. Okay, so words to that effect. So I mean, look, this was a mess. Okay, it was a mess because I think initially they wanted to go the Castro did it route, and eventually Johnson said, no, we're not going to start World War III. He did it alone. Make it work, Mr. Hoover. Make it work. Okay, so that's what's going on there. But that's a mess, right? Because his whole persona is developed on him having relations with, pro-Castro people, even in New Orleans. This is the thing that really surprised me. I brought it up. Think of this, okay? There's 45 to 50 sightings of Oswald being accompanied or escorted with Latino escorts. Between 20 and 25 of them mention one of the escorts being a short, stocky, I mean, with massive arms, massive neck, Cuban, okay? And he's seen 25 times. This particular Cuban stands out like a sore thumb. It's almost like a tattoo right on your forehead there. He's that distinctive. He's also seen in Bannister's office with Bannister and David Ferry separately. So there's sightings of that. So this started a manhunt. Okay, it started a manhunt. And even the Cuban exile said, have you found these 2 guys that are always with Oswald? If you find them, you're gonna know. So it started a friggin' manhunt in that period. And that manhunt made the newspapers. And you can find those in the Garrison files. So the point being, I think, is that if you look at this mess of relationships, that Oswald's involved in, of course, the Warren Commission didn't want to go over New Orleans. They didn't want to study New Orleans because that would bring up the question, well, why was he with him? And who is this guy? And did you ever find him? And who's Dean Andrews? And why did Dean Andrews represent him? And who's Clay Bertrand? Clay Bertrand, were you telling me Clay Bertrand paid for the legal fees, but nobody knows who the hell he is? You have the whole Warren Commission, FBI. I mean, everybody's on the lookout for what the hell happened, but they never found out who Clay Bertrand is, supposedly. Okay, so I mean, I'm going a little bit on a tangent, but I think in a nutshell, that shows the whole, and that shows you what Garrison was onto. And, Garrison at one point wanted to hand over the whole case to the FBI. He says, let me give you my files. I'll give you everything I have. I don't want to touch this anymore. You guys handle it. And the FBI didn't want to touch it. So, I mean, think about it. It's a tragic story. But if you look back at today and you look back at Oliver Stone and the movie JFK, boy, I mean, has this guy been vindicated?
I'm going to ask you guys kind of like, do you have anything else you want to add, Paul, before I ask this question?
Yeah, I would just say that it extended to Jack Ruby as well. There are, what I've been focusing on more recently is Oswald shooting. And what I've uncovered is that Bert Griffin and Leon Hubert, they were the kind of the leads on Jack Ruby for the Warren Commission, and they were digging up. They were going into a fair bit on Ruby's own history, and one of the areas, and just as we're talking tonight, I'm thinking of gun running. That's an area that was clearly very taboo for I think the powers that be that wanted to stifle Garrison's investigation, the gun running, anti-Castro element side of things. And even the Warren Commission were finding traces of that with Jack Ruby, and it was an absolute no-go for them with him as well. So I think if you can, now with the benefit of time, we can look back over from a very high level and see where the tangents end, and what they were to do with. And I think we can, right there, we can make some pretty large inferences in terms of what elements were involved in Dallas, were involved in New Orleans, and they're because of the way they were handled after the fact, the way they were absolutely cut off as very inconvenient facets and truths.
Oh, if I may, because you bring up a really good point. It makes me think of the Rose Cherami story. Because Rose Cherami is the prostitute, stripper, hooker, you name it, who was thrown out of a car driven by two New Orleans-based Latinos who were involved in drug and gun running, right? They were going to Galveston, and she gets thrown out. She's drugged up, but she's warning ahead of time of the assassination. She's warning ahead of time. And what struck me is Francis Fuge, he was a top dog investigator for Garrison, and he was with the Louisiana police force, okay? And he questions her, but he writes in his report that, about this story. And he says that Rose Cherami claimed to be, was a stripper for Jack Ruby. And he marks which was verified. Okay, that is amazing when you think of it, because that links Ruby's gun running with New Orleans gun running with, so that when I read which was verified on that document, I said, okay, this isn't just a rumor. We have a top investigator who did her work history and says this woman. So, that's another woman, Cherami, who had to go to, and she was dead by the time of the Garrison investigation.
Do you know the answer they gave to Cherami? They said that she was drugged up, but somehow she was able to predict the assassination a few days before it even happened. That's one of the many accounts that I've been able to find of someone having foreknowledge of the assassination going down. Probably not even the strangest one. There was one where one dude was having dreams of that was some person was talking to him about Marilyn Monroe committing suicide, and then he named the date, and if you look, it's like 2 weeks before Marilyn Monroe died. And I was like, all right, that's a one-off. And then he's like starts talking about Kennedy, and then he names the date, and this is confirmed by coworkers. He was telling his coworkers this. because the coworkers were interviewed, like, you need to talk to him, you need to find him. He's the one that was telling us this pre-knowledge of the assassination stuff. And he's like, yeah, some girl just came to me in a dream and told me all this stuff. But every date he called out, it was either 1 week or 2 weeks off. Then there's Frank, God, Zagatti, something like that. He's a mob figure.
Frank who?
Frank Zagatti or something like that.
Yeah, it's from Oklahoma.
And he was found shot, like in the middle of a field somewhere. But then if you look at what his account was, he said that the assassination of President Kennedy was going to go down, and then he named the date, and it was like 2 days before Kennedy was killed. But then he stated after that that also they're going to kidnap a member of Frank Sinatra's family to take attention off the assassination. And then December 8th, Frank Sinatra's son gets kidnapped. And I'm like, all right, look, I'm just saying, if that person said that to me, I would just hand him my Powerball tickets or something like that and be like, real quick, place a bet for me. Because that's one of, like I said, many where like you have things like, if you believe, what's his name? Oh God, Richard Case Nagel. If you believe that story, there's just people that somehow have gotten information, whether it was a leak, whether it was through a mob connection, whether it was through, let's say with Rose Cheremy, a Jack Ruby connection, or she was involved. I think she's even stated that she was in the hospital. She stated that she was ordered those three to kill Kennedy. So her initial thing, eventually she became part of it.
The hospital personnel, and it's the hospital personnel that got alarmed after the assassination.
Well, originally she stated it was the two guys she was with that were there, but then she said to Frank, the detective guy, she told him that all three of them are there going to Dallas to get her baby and kill Kennedy or something like that along those lines.
She told that to Francis Fuge, but the personnel said, hey, this woman who's been predicting the Kennedy assassination. And I think she mentions Rubenstein, doesn't she?
I haven't seen that.
She mentions Rubenstein.
I know she said they left Jack Ruby's club, which is an association there.
I don't think that, well, I don't know, maybe. But all I know is that when you have that link of, someone who worked for Ruby and is involved with gun running with New Orleans Latinos, because we know that Ruby would go down to New Orleans often, and sometimes it would be to, confer with Marcelo, whether it was for business or whatnot. So, yeah, it all fits. And you're absolutely right, Paul, that Griffin and Hubert, I think it was, for the Warren Commission, were stymied in their investigation of Ruby. And the HSCA said, this portrayal of Ruby as being a disgruntled nightclub owner, period, forget it. No, he was a gun runner. He was connected with the Dallas cops. He knew them all. He certainly had mafia links, and they named at least 6 or 7 people. His number of phone calls with mafia-linked people, they analyzed them before the assassination. So they just see it peak, and it's every day. He's talking to hitmen and people involved in, these families. And they say, well, that could have been because he was having union problems. Give me a break. So there you go. That his first visitor was the top dog in Dallas.
Campisi.
Okay, who goes to visit?
Savello.
Savello, right? It's Savello who visited, who was Campisi's lieutenant, right?
But he went to Campisi's restaurant is probably what you're seeing.
Yeah, we're supposed to go there in Dallas when we go down this year, but I never made it there.
Ruby was also an FBI informant.
Yeah.
Where'd you get that from?
Oh, it's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to his pre-Castro Cuba activities, I think. The gun running that he was doing for pre-Castro Cuba.
Thought he was just going to Cuba to see the sights. Damn, lied to again. What do you know? I'm just sucking around. Guys, I appreciate the time you gave me to be able to speak about Garrison. Obviously, this was an area I never really touched upon through my assassination research, and it wasn't until relatively recently when I was looking through a lot of the Mary Farrell documentation that there was a lot of mentioning of names, particular names in her database that had a Garrison reference to it. So I had to explore this area, and I thought it would be important to do a focused episode on the Garrison thing to see why anyone who would be new to the assassination would want to cover this area. Because obviously, if you have all these different areas of the assassination that have been researched for a particular time, anyone that's new, I mean, where are they're going to be attracted to what they're attracted to. A lot of people are attracted to Jack Ruby. A lot of people are attracted to the single bullet or whatever went down in Dealey Plaza, trying to explain those events. But we think there's a lot of specific areas there are to cover, and Garrison is just one of those as well too.
Robbie, can I bring up maybe 2 quick points? First of all, in our book, the one I wrote with Jim DiEugenio and 3 attorneys, it's called the JFK Assassination Chokeholds. We have a chapter on who Jack Ruby really was. Okay, and he's a chokehold. In other words, indisputable proof of a conspiracy. The last chapter is called 60 Years of Obstruction of Justice. And you'll find out in that chapter just what was done, not just to obstruct Garrison, but to obstruct the HSCA, the Warren Commission, even the ARB. Okay, I'm talking about destruction of files, and this just went on for 60 years. And you can bring it all the way to both Biden and Trump breaking the law by not declassifying everything by 2017. The second book I want to do is Paul was gracious enough to have me read his new book on Oswald. There are 2 assassinations people talk about. One is JFK. That's an amazing assassination to study. We're still studying it. The other one is Tippit. But how many people really studied Oswald's assassination and what went down? And I have to admit, it's for some reason always been a major blank for me. And I think Paul, his work on that, congratulations, because he sets really the groundwork for minute by minute what happened on January 24th. And you know how you have to understand how Dealey Plaza is made up? Well, you have to understand, all the logistics around where Oswald was arrested and shot to figure out how the heck did Jack Ruby
Wait, did you say January? You said January 24th?
Yeah, no, sorry, November 24th. Absolutely right.
I was like, shit, did I forget a important date in the assassination?
No, I was thinking Frank Sinatra. No, I mean, it was, sorry, that I don't have enough caffeine in me yet. But look, that, by the way, I think will be a really useful book for the research community.
I'm gonna make sure I link your links, Paul, for your book, Assassination Chokeholds, in the description below. And Paul, when your link obviously comes out with the book release and everything like that, I'll make sure I'm gonna put that in all your episodes that you've been involved in so far.
Well, I'd just say, if I can, Robbie, just very quickly, if I can just go back to the Garrison folders, I'll send you the link with the article which I wrote about, doing the project, but also where people can access the index. It's very much a resource for anyone of all knowledge levels, and it can be even for people at our level where we remember particular names. As things maybe declassification, if that happens, new names might come out that people might find on this index. So I really want it to. Well, still want people to go on there and have a look, and you can even just by using it as a traditional spreadsheet, you can see that
yes,
Garrison was he really did have these sights set on Ferry and Shaw, that they are the 2 people with the highest mentions, amount of mentions throughout all of his folders. So I think that right there statistically gives us an idea of where he was focusing on. I'd really like people just to check out the index and access that as well, because it for all the reasons that we've spoken about today and so much more, it's those folders. There is still much to be gleaned on, and if anything is anything left to be said is that just a name, one person could potentially draw the thread of a whole tangent. It can be a linkage. I think that's what the way Garrison operates.
There are 9,000 pages there of Garrison files, and what Paul did with the index is kind of what Sylvia Mahar did with the master index of the Warren Commission, because the Warren Commission was not indexed, and it was a researcher's nightmare. So what Paul did now is with the Excel file, oh, you want to know more about David Ferry? Here are all the pages. You want to know more about such a topic? Here are all the pages. So they go hand in hand. Order. Where can you get the index, Paul, and the?
So it's at Kennedy's and King and Blackout Radio.
Okay.
That's a downloadable resource from there. Yeah.
You can get both the files, the 9,000 pages, and the index.
Yeah. But I mean, from it, I was able to start my own look into Oswald shootings. So I think that's one example of how it can be used, and you never know, what other people might see in it. So please do check it out. The Garrison folders. Yeah.
I'll make sure I link all those links in the description, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure chatting with you guys, and thank you again for joining me to talk about this subject. I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.